Welcome everybody. I hope you can all hear me. If someone could just let me know that they can hear me in the chat box on the side, that would be awesome. For today's session, we will be going through assessment tools. Thanks, Ben. We'll be going through assessment tools, assessment validation, and what is the process for assessment. So I'm hoping everyone's up to speed with this. Some of this is what I also go through in the assessment validation workshop, but you'll also find that I've got some additional juicy bits that you'll be able to use on where to find assessment tools and things like that. Okay, so with this webinar, as per usual, no question is a stupid question. If you have any questions, please put your question in the chat box on the left-hand side of the screen, and I'll endeavour to answer all the questions I can throughout the day. Now, the more questions I have, the better this session will be for you. So I'd like you to, if you can put questions on there, even if you think they're hard ones, I'll try and deal with them. This webinar forms part of your continuous improvement process under Standard 2.2. One of the things I've been recommending to all of our clients, because they've been finding it difficult to actually have the Q&C meeting or schedule it or actually take any minutes or anything. One thing that I'm recommending is while you're at the webinar, do your minutes, type up your minutes at the same time, because this webinar forms part of your Q&C requirements. So you're doing your continuous improvement now. So you could have your minutes open and type up some things of what you learnt today and what action items you're going to take based on what you learned. Plus, I'm also going to go through the policies and procedures and give you a review of what those policies and procedures are. So now you don't have to read them. You just have to listen to this webinar, and you've reviewed your policies and procedures for that month as per the continuous improvement cycle. So you can review it, but you don't need to following this. And as per the policies and procedures, if there's any opportunities for improvement, you should add those to your opportunities for improvement register and discuss it at your meeting and what you're going to improve. Okay, so let's get started. And if you have any burning questions about assessment tools, put them in the chat box on the left-hand side, and as I said, I will get to answer them. We're testing something new today. We've now got a new little snazzy little microphone that I'm now using, so hopefully the sound will be much better than it was. And I've also got, I don't know, you won't be able to see, I've got this really bright light on me, so I'm now well lit up. And we've got no air conditioning at the moment, so it's pretty hot in here. But anyway, I'll survive. Okay, so Standard 1.8 is all about how you implement an assessment system that ensures that all your assessments will comply with the training product. So whatever is on training.gov.au and within the unit of competency. You also have to make sure that your assessment tools meet the rules of evidence and principal assessment requirements. Now, we went through this through our assessment validation workshop, but I'm going to give you a touch base on what this all means. Okay, so assessment tools are the most non-compliant at audit. This is where you'll have the auditors will pick at it quite a bit. They'll normally spend a bit of time on assessment tools, and depending on what you put on your scope will depend on how much time they'll spend on the assessment tools. If you have high risk qualifications, they'll spend a bit more time on your assessment tools. So, and normally the issues are around they're not meeting the performance criteria requirements, they're not meeting the assessment requirements, and any critical aspects and knowledge evidence and knowledge and skills evidence, and sometimes they might state that you must have simulated activities and things like that. It's when you're not addressing everything in the unit of competency as per training.gov.au. Another big non-compliance, our tools have not been contextualised to the learner cohort. So if you've identified that you have a learner cohort or a target audience that is low language and literacy, you should have mechanisms in place to ensure that those assessment tools will meet those low language and literacy requirements. You should also look at if the majority of your students are on the job and you will be conducting assessments on the job or in the workplace. How have you ensured that your assessment tools are contextualised for on the job? And I know I've got clients who are doing first aid courses that are specifically targeted at the security industry. So some of the non-compliances that are coming up is, okay, you're doing first aid for the security industry, you need to have case studies and role models within your assessment tools that are targeted to security industry, so that it's contextualized for your target audience. And that's what contextualization means. So you can contextualize it by putting your logo and branding it and things like that, but you need to make sure it actually addresses who your typical learner cohort will be. The other one that becomes non-compliant, particularly for re-registration and 1 year post-initials, is that you haven't actually validated any assessment tools yet. So we're supposed to validate 50% of our assessment tools within the first 3 years. You need to make sure that that's actually happened, and that's how these standards will tie together that we're talking about today. The RTO doesn't have a mapping tool, and you don't have to have a mapping tool. There's no requirement that you have to have a mapping tool, but it certainly makes life so much easier when you go to audit, because you've got a mapping tool that you can go, okay, so this assessment tool that we have meets this performance criteria, this performance criteria, and you can go directly to it in the audit and identify what it is the auditor is looking for. The other great thing about having a mapping tool is if anything changes within the unit of competency on training.gov.au, you can know where to exactly go in your assessment tool to fix it in order to make sure that that the assessment tool meets the new unit of competency requirements when there's a new version that comes out. So a mapping tool is very, very useful for not only for audit, but for validation and also for your ongoing compliance whenever a unit is superseded, so that you can transition. It makes transitioning much easier. So I've just got some examples here of a unit downloaded from training.gov.au. Okay, your assessment tools must meet the requirements of the training package, and this, as I said, is one of the top non-compliances. And this includes, you need to address the performance criteria. So within the performance criteria, how have your assessment tools met those requirements in that performance criteria? And when there's a change in training package, you need to go in and actually have a look at the performance criteria and make sure what is it that's changed, and does my assessment tools now meet the performance criteria requirements? And then also the assessment requirements. Now, I get arguments with this, shouldn't that be mapped separately, and should that be, done separately? No, they layer on top of each other. So the performance criteria and the assessment requirements layer onto each other, and then you should validate them together. So your mapping tool should map those together. So it doesn't mean for the assessment requirements you have separate assessments. They should be the same assessments, but they should layer on each other. Another good place to go is have a look at the companion guides. We've now got these skills services organisations. That's what SSO stands for. They've replaced the Industry Skills Council. We're still waiting on what's happening with there and when the companion guides are going to come out and things like that. But you can still access all the old Industry Skills Council websites and the companion guides on there, but you should be also looking at the companion guides. More often than not, and the reason why companion guides came out is because they give you all of that additional information that's not in the unit of competency, performance criteria and assessment requirements. It gives you juicy bits that you can use to make sure that your assessment tools are compliant and they're going to meet the industry requirements. And you should also address the foundation skills within each unit of competency. What are those skills and knowledge that the students should have prior to getting in? And then when they finish the course, what are those skills and knowledge that they should have? Okay, so we always recommend to all of our clients, purchase your assessment tools the first time around. And the reason why is because it can be quite lengthy when you're writing your own assessment tools. So we always recommend that you purchase. But just because you purchase an assessment tool from someone doesn't mean it's going to be compliant. So it depends on who you're getting your assessment tools from and whether they're a reputable organisation. We recommend, because there are assessment tools out there that I wouldn't recommend or wouldn't use myself. All the ones that we recommend, I'm going to show you on the website where you can get them on our website. All the ones we recommend are ones that I would use, so we would use as a team. You've got to make sure when you're purchasing that they need to address the unit of competency requirements. So you should be looking around and asking the developers, do they address the unit of competency and the assessment requirements, and how do they do that? Have you got a mapping tool you can show me? Can you show me how you've validated? Because they should be validating as well. Ask them, do you have any evidence of you validating your assessment tools against the performance criteria and the assessment requirements. You also need to identify, are they suitable for your target audience? So who you've targeted as your, it might be who you're planning to deliver an assess to, or who you are currently delivering an assess to. So when you have your 1 year post-initial and subsequent re-registration audit, the auditor will focus on the actual target audience you have now. For initial registration, they'll focus on the target audience that you have in your TAS. And your TAS should always reflect who are your target audience. So they want to see, so what that means when you're having assessment tools for your target audience is, do they meet their existing skills and knowledge? So if you said your students have to have at least 3 years industry experience, and they must have management experience, for example, and skills and knowledge in certain equipment, your target audience, your assessment tools, would have to be adjusted to meet that existing worker's skills and knowledge. We don't want to be doing a lot of background work and a lot of the lower level learning when they're actually at a higher level. So if we've stated you must have this first, we don't want to go through all the ins and outs of what they may already have in place. Vice versa, if they're new entrants, we should be looking at all the assessment tools that are going to be required for a new entrant. So an existing worker, you would have portfolio of evidence, you would have assessments they complete on the job, you'd have a range of strategies for helping the student to complete assessments on the job. Whereas for new entrants, they're not going to have access to a job. They're not going to have access to a workplace, may or may not. They may not have one. So we need to make sure that your assessment tools will actually meet their needs. You'll need to do simulations in the workplace. You'll need to have strategies in place for the student to be able to complete assessment tools whilst they're in the classroom and outside of the classroom, so if they're at home. If you're making a requirement that they have to do work placement, then they should do some assessment tasks on the work placement. Are they suitable for the learners cohort's language literacy and numeracy requirements? So we don't want to have assessment tools that are delivered way up here when the students' language and literacy skills are way down here. We need to make sure that we're addressing what are their language and literacy skills. And then we've also got to take into consideration the level of the qualification that you're offering and making sure that the level of the qualification is going to meet their needs as well. So if your typical learner cohort does have low language and literacy, you should have L&N assessments that they should complete before they enter into the course. And then your assessment tool should be written with the language and literacy skills that your typical learner cohort would have. So that's what that contextualisation means. And all of these questions you can ask the publishers as well. What have they got in their tools? Will the student be required to have access to the internet to complete their assessment tasks? Not all students have access to the internet. And if they do, how are you going to make sure they have access? Now, one of the strategies I used to put in place is tell the student to go to a library, or I had a computer lab that was available to them. So you just have some sort of mechanism in place that will enable them to have access to the learning that you're going to be offering and the assessments you're offering. I'm going to definitely have that you call questions, useful links tab on our website. So if you just go on our website, you'll see one tab called Training Resources. Now this was updated recently, so we've got a whole heap of new assessment tools listed on there under Training Resources that you can access. We've put more of the different publishers that we've been using. So you'll see it's listed in a table, and we have the name of the company, the qualifications or the training package that they develop assessment tools for. We also have a hyperlink to the website, so you just click on it and it'll take you to their website. If they have a Facebook page in there, a phone number, and you can also send an email to them. So we have made it so easy for you to be able to range of different are available. Now, this isn't the only source. You can, of course, Google it. There are lots of different ways. You can also have a look at what your competition are doing as well. I have had competition ring our clients and say, what assessment tools do you use? That's normally, that's going to be competition. Students don't normally ask what assessment tools you're using. So they'll want to see, students will want to know that you are delivering assessments in accordance with the requirements. And normally the students are more focused on training than they are on assessment tools. So, if you get someone ringing saying what assessment tools do you use, it's generally because it's your competition ringing. But anyway, I would recommend that you check out some of these websites and look what else is available there. They're all very good assessment tools that are available there. Okay, all right, we'll just get back to the slides. Okay. So that's some different places where you can get access to a list of training resources. There's a wide range out there. Also, your client liaison officer will recommend assessment tools to you as well. If you're looking at putting an additional scope on and you're a member, you can just contact client liaison officer and ask them, what do you recommend? We have a lot of experience with different assessment tools, and there are ones that, as I said, that we would recommend and not recommend. Anyway, when you purchase your assessment tools, what should you purchase? And we get this question a lot where people don't know what is it that they should actually be purchasing and what will the auditor be looking for when they come along to audit. So you should have a learner guide to assessment. What this means is what you give to the student for assessment and all the questions that are in there and things like that, and it should have instructions to the student on how they're going to be assessed. If they're doing a simulation, there should be clear instructions to the student on how that simulation will be conducted. So it should be, you will be undertaking a role play for this assessment. You'll be required to be assessed against this performance criteria, or you might have a checklist. This is the checklist your assessor is going to use to assess you against this role model that you're going to be doing, or this simulation that you're going to be doing. And there should be clear instructions on how that's going to be conducted. It's going to take an hour, you're going to be required to be in a team, whatever the requirements are for that assessment. Now, vice versa, you should also have an assessor guide to assessment and how you plan for the assessor to undertake the assessment. So it should be clear on the assessor's guide the instructions to the assessor. For you to conduct this assessment, you must have these resources in place. You'll need to have set up this scenario this way. This is all the equipment you're going to need and how they're to conduct it. Now, the reason why we want these instructions clearly on there for both the student and the assessor. So for the student, we want it clear because we want to ensure consistency, same with the assessor. So it's consistency with assessment and consistency with marking for the assessor. So for the student, if you have more than one assessor and they have an assessor in one class that assesses a different way in a different class, or they have a friend that goes to a different class, they're being assessed the same way. So it's valid, it's consistent, you've got sufficiency of training, you're collecting sufficiency of evidence because you're giving sufficient instructions to the student prior to doing the assessment. Now, the assessor, you need to make it clear what are the assessment requirements, this is how you are to conduct it, and this is the evidence you have to collect, and there should be suggested answers in there for what they should be benchmarking against. Now, the suggested answers aren't set in concrete. It's not like you must have these answers. It should be a benchmark that the assessor will be looking for. Now, the best way I can explain this, one person's interpretation of what valid communication skills are or effective communication skills, and what another person's interpretation of assessment of observation skills or what they're observing communication skills can be totally different. So you need to make sure that you are making it consistent with your assessment tools. As I said before, the assessment mapping tool should also be included. Now, good publishers will always include an assessment mapping tool. That they will have a clear guideline on this assessment tool is in this performance criteria. So we've included the assessment requirements under this performance criteria. So it's very clear for the assessor, so they know what evidence they're collecting. It's very clear when you go to audit, so the auditor can see that your assessment tools meet all the performance criteria and assessment requirements. And it's also very good for when there's a change in training package to identify what do you need to change in your assessment tools to meet a new performance criteria requirement. Textbooks is also very important. A lot of people do forget that they've got to get textbooks for your students. So your textbooks is the learner guide, what the student uses to learn. So it's what you're using in the classroom to teach, and it's what they're using to learn. So it should be a book. It may be something that you've just produced or purchased that you've photocopied and that you handed out, but it's some sort of textbook or handout that you're giving to the student to concrete their learning so that they can read through that as part of their learning. So other training resources that you'll need as per the training product requirements, so when you go into the unit of competencies, it'll tell you that there's required resources that you'll need to assess each unit. So not every unit will have required resources, but a lot of them do, particularly if it's practical-based or tools-based assessments that you're doing. So, for example, physical resources like first aid equipment, including mannequins, face masks, and bandages. You should have, like when we write a TAS for you, we put all of those resources into the TAS. So you should have all of those in place for your audit at all times. You should have that for audit, and at all times you should be maintaining those resources and have them available at any time. Because just because you have your initial audit, 1 year post-initial, and then your 5 or 7 year re-reg, doesn't mean you won't be audited. ASPA can jump in and audit you at any time. It could be a strategic review of a qualification or a unit of competency, and they've decided to choose your RTO. So you should always have the resources in place at all times. And this could also include PowerPoint presentations or other handouts or videos or readings. There's a wide range of resources that you should have in place. Anything that you need to be able to deliver a qualification or a course, they're the resources that you should have in place. We also highly recommend that you register on TGA, training.gov.au, for the qualification or unit competencies that you have on your scope. So once you're registered, you should register to get updates for your RTO, and everything on your scope you'll get notified on. Pre-registration, we recommend you get on the TGA and register for updates for the qualifications that or units of competency that you're putting on your scope. That way you can keep up to date with any changes of what's changed in the unit of competencies. Okay, so that's standard 1.8. 1.9 to 1.11 is assessment validation. There is some repetitive stuff in here that is also relevant for assessment tools, and that's why I'm doing them together, because they all are relevant. So assessment validation is standard 1.9, 1.10, and 1.11. And in these standards, it actually says you must have a plan and implement this plan for ongoing systematic validation. And you must have this in place. And it should include when assessment validation will occur, which training product will be the focus of the validation, who will lead and participate in the validation activities, how the outcomes of these activities will be acted upon. 1.10 is that you'll validate 50% of your tools within the first 3 years, and 1.9 is that you'll have sufficient members of your validation team will have sufficient skills and knowledge to be valid as an assessment validator. Okay, so how do you ensure that your tools are compliant, your assessment tools? Well, the best way to ensure that your assessment tools are compliant is to validate your tools, which is why they have these standards together. Now, for initial registration, I don't recommend that you do validate. If you can, it's great if you can do that. And the main reason why is because it's not until you start using assessment tools that you'll really identify what are the issues that you're having with that assessment tool, whether it's working or not, and you'll get a much better understanding of those assessment tools. So when you validate, you should validate your tools against the rules of evidence and principles of assessment. So this, you might recognise this table from the assessment validation workshop. So the rules of evidence are identifying that your tools are valid, the process is sound and that with the assessment, and that what you claim it is what it is, and you're actually collecting the right assessment, and it's valid because you've also got a benchmark that you're working with. Authenticity, so ensuring that the evidence that you're collecting is authentic and is actually coming from the student, and that you are meeting the industry requirements as well for those. Sufficiency of evidence is, it used to be an old wives' tale that sufficient evidence was 2 or 3 assessment types from 3 different areas. So it might be observation, written, question and answer. That's all out the window now. Sufficient is for the unit of competency that you're assessing. Are you collecting sufficient evidence to deem this student competent? So there should be enough assessment tools there to be able to deem them competent. And is it sufficient for the learner cohort and the industry that you're targeting? Like what I was talking about with first aid, when you're targeting the security industry, are we collecting sufficient evidence when the students will be doing first aid on the job in a security job? There should be scenarios that are relevant to them. Is it current? Is the evidence we're collecting current? Does it meet current industry needs and requirements? Is it current to the current equipment that is available? That's what rules of evidence are. So that's a lot around the equipment you're using as well, but also the assessments that you're collecting. Principles of assessment is it fair? Have you made it fair and equitable to the students? So one way to make it fair is to have assessor's guidelines, so instructions to the students, so a learner guide, an assessor guide, and the assessor guide is instructions to the assessor with suggested answers. So that's how we make sure that it's fair to the student, because we've got consistency with our assessment. Is it flexible? How are you going to adjust the training to meet the learner cohort needs? Still within the unit of competency requirements, so you've actually addressed what the unit of competencies are. You haven't made it so flexible that it's now outside the range of the unit of competency. That is valid, so the principles of assessment, how you're validating is valid, so how you're conducting your assessment, is valid in terms with industry requirements, student requirements, things like that. And is the evidence you're collecting reliable? So if you're collecting third-party reports or portfolios of evidence, is that reliable form of evidence that you're collecting? So these are all the different things you need to consider when you are putting assessment tools in place. Okay, so the way that we make sure that you meet the requirements of 1.9, 1.10 is we have an assessment validation schedule. So we have this template for you. When we do your initial registration, we write the validation schedule for you. We also do it when we do an addition scope. So the standards state that you should have a plan for assessment validation, and this should include a policy and procedure, which you do have, and the way we address it is we have a schedule. The schedule should be completed whenever a new qualification, so whenever you add a new qualification to your scope, you should add that to your schedule. Now, we recommend you write one schedule per qualification, but if you have a range of units, just put the range of units in the one validation schedule. Or you can have one great big one. Something we're actually going to be implementing soon is we're going to turn this into a spreadsheet, so you can have all of your assessment tools in one spreadsheet, and then that way we've got a whole valid, so we're going to put the instructions on the first page, and then we're going to have this all in a spreadsheet, so it would make it much easier for you to manage. So when you have your validation schedule, it must include all the units of competencies for each training product, so you should include the units on there, and the assessment tools for that unit. So for each unit, how many assessment tools? Is there a written? Is there an observation? What is the name of those tools? Who are the publisher? You should put that on the schedule here, so that should be included. Who's going to lead the validation team? This has been coming up a lot in the last 6 months at audit, is they actually want who's going to lead the validation team on the schedule, which I think is ridiculous, because in 6 months' time it might be someone totally different. They just want you to have a name on the schedule. So what they're looking for is who is going to be your lead validator, who's responsible for ensuring that validation happens. So I'd recommend you put someone on that's part of your team, and you can change it. I have had auditors say to me that you can change that as well. The dates of the actual pre- and post-assessment validation, so you should enter it on here when you've done pre-assessment validation and when you've conducted post-assessment validation. And this whole process should ensure that 50% of your training products are validated within a 3-year cycle and 100% within a 5-year cycle. So you should hold assessment validation meetings, and this should be in your schedule of when you're going to conduct that. We recommend that you should conduct these at least twice a year. You should have 2 sessions that you schedule per year. I normally do January or June, July. January is normally a slow month for assessment validation, so for an RTO. So January is a really good time to do assessment validation. June, July, if you're doing a changeover of terms, is also a good time. Maybe July, if you're doing all your BAS and your accounting and all that sort of stuff, you could do it in July. But you could also get someone else to come in and lead the validation as well. You should choose slower times of the year. So you'll have to look at, so we normally do January and June or July. It's up to you to adjust that to whatever is your slower times of the year. Now, just because we put it in the schedule doesn't mean you can't change it. So whatever we put in there, or if you set your schedule, you can change it. But as long as you are following your schedule. So if you said you're going to do it here, that you do it there, or that you show evidence through maybe a Q&C meeting that you change your assessment validation schedule to meet your needs, your requirements. You should allow at least 2 hours for your first assessment tool to be validated, and then it takes about an hour after that. Once you get your head around the assessment tool, and once you've been using them, it is much easier as well. But it'll take about 2 hours for the first one, because you'll generally find if they're assessment tools from the same publisher or the same developer, you'll generally find the same, similar, they're developed in a similar way, and they'll might have the same non-compliances or compliances. So it should be, you'll find that you'll have a groove that you'll get into when you're validating. You're best to validate about 4 assessment tools in one sitting. This is from my experience. I find it's good to do it that way. And you can knock them over quite quickly when you do them. Sometimes if you cluster them, you do those clusters together. So validate the clusters together. By all means, don't try and separate them. If you assess via a cluster, you should validate as a cluster as well. So that's what training product means. Is training product is not a unit, not a qualification, not a skill set, not a cluster. It's however you're putting it together. It means all of those. It's not one single thing. It means all of those. So and it all depends on the size of the unit of competency and the assessment requirements or the performance criteria requirements and the assessment requirements for that unit of competency. That will determine how long it's going to take for you to do that. So I'd recommend you just knock over a couple and see how you go with that. Okay, when you undertake your assessment validation, a lot of what those other documents we were talked about earlier on in the PowerPoint, you're going to need all your assessment tools, the written, oral, demonstration, third party, all the assessment tools in place for that unit. You'll need to have that at your validation meeting. The training product outlines, so from training.gov.au, so you should go on to TGA and download the unit of competency, performance criteria and the assessment requirements and use that. Any assessment processes, instructions, tools, anything you're using to assess that unit. Delivering an assessment plan is also very good time to validate that as well. And of course your assessment mapping tool, which is normally provided by a publisher. If it's not, you can develop your own as well. So if you haven't got one by the publisher, and at validation is a really good time to write a mapping tool if you don't have one at the moment. So I recommend before you go, if you haven't got any mapping tools in place, before you start developing, you might as well do your validation at the same time because you'll knock over 2 birds with one stone. Okay, we use an assessment validation report for the evidence of that assessment validation. So when conducting your assessment validation, you should use this report. And we have a whole mechanism, so in this report we have the process in there and we have the whole mechanism on how you will validate. Once the report is completed and you've completed your assessment validation, and if there was any non-compliances or any rectifications that you have suggested for improvement, you should write an opportunity for improvement for that recommendation and then record that on your opportunity for improvement register on your monthly meeting. And also conduct your opportunity for improvement, so complete the rectifications. The opportunity for improvement should be acted upon and minuted. So that's our evidence that you actually conducted assessment validation and that you've also reviewed your assessment tools to meet the requirements. Who should be on your assessment validation team? The team should collectively hold relevant vocational competencies and current industry skills, have current knowledge and skills in vet teaching and learning. They should hold TAE, so Cert 4 Training Assessment, or a minimum of the assessor skill set for them to be on the validation team. So that's who should be on your team. These could include trainers and assessors, the RTO manager or senior management, industry experts, so you could bring in people, some of your clients maybe, some business owners, things like that, who can be industry experts. We also recommend you could also do it with a publisher as well. That's a good way to get validation done. You can bring consultants in who have expertise in assessment validation and then staff from other RTOs. So you can validate with other RTOs as well. It's a good strategy to be able to do that. You will need an assessment validation facilitator, and this facilitator is responsible for ensuring that the validation happens and that you are doing it on a regular basis. Now, this facilitator could be an admin person. It could be someone who's not even involved with the assessment. They're the ones that just make sure that we keep moving along with the validation. They're like the chairperson when you're minuting, when you're doing minutes. They're the person who makes sure that the validation keeps going, so they lead the validation. They also organise the validation meetings. They provide the guidelines for assessors about the materials to be validated and how it should be collected and presented. And they are also responsible for maintaining the validation documentation and the recording on the opportunities for improvement and the Q&C meeting. Reviewing the validation process on a regular basis. They should be looking at that on a regular basis, and they should sign off the assessment validation report as well at the end of each session. One really important thing with assessment validation, your assessor can't validate their own assessment tools. So if they've completed assessments, they can't then go back around and go, okay, well, now I'm going to validate my own assessment tools. Oh, yeah, they're all good. They're fantastic. I did a great job. Woohoo! Now we'll just take off and that's our validation done. No, can't do that. Has to be, you can have, if you have a couple of assessors in the one organisation, you could get one assessor to validate another assessor's tools and another assessment tools will go around. So they just can't sign off. They can be part of the validation team, but they just can't sign off on the assessment validation. So if you are the assessor and you're me, myself and I RTO, so there's no one else there, or you're the only one there, bring someone else outside of, or someone you could possibly another RTO, and get the other person to sign off on your validation. The reason why is to ensure that we aren't biased about our assessments. And normally what happens is you know what you know and you don't know a lot. So you don't know a lot outside of. And this is what I talk about when I come in and do systems checks, is you become complacent with what's in your organisation. I come along and pop and identify things that you wouldn't have seen. So, and that's the same thing with assessment validation as well, as they come in and you get a different perspective looking at your assessment tools. Bring in a student too. Student is a great way to bring them in and get some feedback from them on how they went. All right, that's assessment validation. We haven't got any questions, so you're all over it. Now everyone knows what they're doing, which is awesome. If you have any questions following this webinar, please do not hesitate to contact your CLO who can assist you with any questions that you may have. And of course, you can also go to the Q&C manual and have a look at the policy and procedure in the Q&C manual as well. Standard 1.12, very, very simple one. The RTO offers recognition of prior learning. Very simple on the audit tool. You've just got to have something in place that says that you do offer RPL. Part of the assessment requirements under 1.8 is you should have, so if we're offering RPL, you should have some sort of mechanism in place for RPL, unless you have a unit or a qualification that can't offer RPL. So there's different requirements around whether you do RPL. You shouldn't be offering RPL for it. It depends on the skills. Look, I wouldn't be doing first aid via RPL, for example. But if you're doing a single unit on plan and manage meetings and they've got plenty of experience in planning and managing meetings, then of course you can give them RPL for that. What are you going to collect? And this is what the RPL strategies is. What evidence are you going to collect to demonstrate that that student has the skills, required skills and knowledge against the performance criteria and the assessment requirements of the unit of competency? We provide an RPL kit. This is a blank template. It's not populated whatsoever. You need to populate that for your qualification or unit of competency on what you believe should be in your RPL kit, what evidence you should be collecting. So if you go on to Unicorn, you'll be able to download your RPL kit, and it's a great kickstart if you haven't got anything in place at the moment. I know a lot of publishers now are offering an RPL kit or some sort of RPL mechanism in their assessment tools. So check out what tools you've got at the moment and just see if they've got a mechanism in place for RPL as well. And you must, and basically this standard means you must offer RPL on all your marketing materials. So you should have something on your website that says that we offer RPL, have something on your marketing material that says that we offer RPL. So you should have a process there for RPL and make it clear and transparent to the student that you offer that. Got a question, woohoo! When a government regulator provides very prescriptive resources assessment materials, e.g. security, are these classed as being already validated? Ooh, good question. So SLED, for example, provide their own assessment tools. No. Question is no. Or the answer is no. So SLED validate their own tools against the industry requirements, but they don't validate their tools against the performance criteria and the unit of competency requirements. So you need to make sure that you validate it against the performance criteria, the assessment requirements, rules of evidence and principal assessment. That the regulator won't validate against that. SLED and ASQA have huge issues. They don't talk to each other. They don't, they're not very helpful with each other at all. So you should validate. And once again, Ben, what you should look at is start using the assessment tools and then do some validation following once you've started using assessment tools and get your head around it. But yeah, there is some issues around that where they may be inadequate. If we feel they're inadequate, how do we make the changes? We aren't allowed to, are we? No, you're not allowed to change the SLED tool, but you can add additional assessments. So you can have just the SLED assessment tool that they've got to use, and then you have additional assessments that meet the requirements of the performance. You can't change their tool because it's a requirement that you must use their tool, but you have additional assessments to make sure that it meets the performance criteria and the assessment requirements. That's how you do that. Same with RSA and RCG, it's the same requirements there. So if you do and if you're using tools with RSA, if the government is actually supplying it, because some of the states do supply the RSA and RCG assessments, you just make sure you add additional assessments to meet the performance criteria and the assessment requirements. So that's how you do that. Got it? Great. Awesome. So different evidence that you can use for RPL is, you know, they could perform it in the workplace, they could do a demonstration, you could do an observation checklist, third-party reporting. Portfolios are great for RPL. You shouldn't make RPL so difficult that they might as well do the course. I know a lot of RTOs do that, but you really have to look at the unit of competency and the assessment requirements for the qualification or the unit that you're doing when you do RPL. So you need to identify, and if there's any regulatory requirements where you may not be able to, so for example, SLED, you may not be able to do RPL. So you need to have a look at what evidence do I need to collect to say, and basically with any assessment, what you're doing is stating, okay, I've collected sufficient evidence to say that this student is competent to do this in the workplace, and you as a trainer would hire them. Like, that's what I think is the most important part. If you wouldn't hire them, now if you have a personality conflict, that's beside the point. It's if they have the skills and knowledge, required skills and knowledge to do that competency on the job, that's how you deem them competent. Same with RPL, same process. So you could do interview questions, I've seen stories of practice, there's lots of different ways you can do RPL that's not overly complicated and not difficult. Another great way to do it is to go on the job and observe them in the workplace, get them to put together a portfolio of evidence, speak to their managers and supervisors, and that's a good way of doing RPL as well. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for attending today's session. My picture's not coming up for some reason. Please note that all these webinars are recorded. Oh, before I go from there, any questions, if you have any questions, and this is open to any questions whatsoever. It doesn't have to be around assessment tools. It can be around any question you might have whatsoever at all. Please post your question if you have any. If not, we will be, and I'm just going to flick back to the first one, next month. Next month, we will be looking at, standards 1.3 to 1.20. That one's going to be a nice, easy one for everyone. So that's basically looking at third parties and what, trainers and assessors, sorry, is 1.13, skills and knowledge of the trainer assessor. 1.14 to 1.2, sorry, I've got a bit mixed up. Some of it is third parties, so if you've got assessors who work as third parties. We've also got trainers and assessors skills and quals. And also over to 1.20 is looking at anybody delivering TAE as well. So what are the trainers' requirements and there's some new requirements that have come out now for TAE as well. So I haven't got any questions. Thank you very much for attending today. I hope I was able to answer all your questions. Please don't forget, so I'm just going to send you a reminder that you can jump onto, I'm just going to show you, if you jump onto Unicorn, we have a section in Unicorn where you can ask questions. So if you have any questions, you can go in there and ask those questions. So if you go into Unicorn, you see this lovely icon here that says Ask Viv. If you click on that icon, it'll actually take you to this wonderful forum where you can post a question. And this question goes to our team, and our team will jump on there and answer questions. So you could have a question at any time, day or night, because I know a lot of our clients are at night time. They're doing their RTO stuff. jump on here and post a question, and we'll answer that question for you and help you out with those questions you have there. It's a little secret little button here on Unicorn that you can click on and go in there. The other thing that's new is you may have noticed we've got a whole heap of videos now in the help section on Unicorn. So you can go on there and go into help, and there's a whole heap of previous webinars that are in there. And also, if you join our YouTube group, so if you go to the Vivacity website, and up the top here is this very small but significant links to all our social networks. If you click on YT for YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube channel, you'll also get access to other videos. We have playlists in there and things like that. So there's all sorts of videos that you can access in there. And there's also playlists that you could access for previous webinars that we have in place. Video kit now. We've also got our Twitter, Facebook group on there. I recommend, if you haven't done it yet, please like our Facebook group. We put lots of posts on there about what we do, where we're up to. Last night about the Biggest Loser, Steve Commando Willis. His RTOs, the RTO that he sponsors is facing cancellation at the moment. So we'll put interesting stories. Well, of course, we're also putting great things about the conference. And if you haven't noticed yet, we've had a major change to our conference. There's been a change in structure. We now have one-day registrations. We do recommend that all of our clients do both days, but the two-day format is now focused around one stream, which is on assessment, on training and assessment, so RTO World, that's Thursday, and Friday is all about business. I have a lot of business friends out there who also wanted to come to our conference, so we've separated them all. And you'll also see that the price has changed significantly. So we've got quite a bit of a price change in there. We just want to get as many people there as possible. So a one-day registration for a member, so anybody who's currently a client is a member, is $390. For the 2 days, it's $690. So that's a reduction from $990 for the 2 days. So a significant reduction. If you haven't registered yet, please register. Anybody who's already registered, we're offering a special offer for you. You should have been contacted by now. And you've got a special offer for anybody who was early bird registration. There's no more early birds. This is it. This is our price for the rest of the registration process. So if you haven't registered yet, please register. We're expecting 200 people. That's our aim. We have some fantastic speakers. I've just taken on a new business coach. The business coach is Kerwin Ray. He's my business coach, and I'm doing his mastermind program where I'm going to be nailing and scaling my business. I've learned some amazing things from him already. He's coming along to present for 2 hours. He is absolutely amazing. He'll teach you marketing skills, sales skills, how to manage your finances, a whole range of things that are going to help you in your business. Highly, highly recommend you come along. It's in Newcastle, so if you're not from Newcastle, it's a great place to visit. If you're from Newcastle, you've got no excuse. You should be registering now. Get on there, get online now and register, because this is going to be a fantastic conference, and I really want you all to be there, because the more clients that we get there, the better, because I'm always recommending clients to joint venture with other clients. Great place for me to introduce you to my other clients. So if you come along on the Thursday night, we've got a cocktail function, and we've got a great event happening at the cocktail function where we're going to be networking and meeting other people. So I'd love you to come along. Love to see you there. Okay, great. Thank you, guys. Thank you for attending today. Look forward to our next session, which is the first Monday of next month. Thanks, guys. Bye.